Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 35 of Lean Whiskey. I'm Mark Graben. I'm kind of tired. It's a Sunday night. We're going to try to have a kind of a energetic, fun episode, though. We're joined, as usual, by
Jamie Flinchball, and I'm a bit tired myself. And usually, it's when you're tired, then drinking whiskey isn't the cure. But
no.
It's what we do here.
I'm neither admitting nor denying that has anything to do with why I'm tired, right? So we can talk about cause and effect versus countermeasures. we got on before we started recording. Like, how you doing? Great. Like, well, okay, actually tired. Because Jamie admitted first. Like, I don't know. Why am I trying to gloss over? Like, it's just that reflex. How you doing? Oh, great day. I mean, not a bad day.
Not a bad day. I've had a great day. I'm just tired. So I've had a great weekend, actually. So, but sometimes, good things make you tired. And when people ask me how it's going, I tell the truth. So
sure. It was a beautiful day here. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's been sunny and 65 degrees. So I'm going to enjoy that as much as we can get it. As winter approaches, this is kind of new again.
New again.
Being someplace where it gets cold more in the winter time. So maybe whiskey is a counter. No, that's not really true, but it makes you feel warm. Whiskey is a countermeasure.
It is. It feels good when it's snowing outside, and you'll get some of that. So I am in Washington, D.C., in the Gaylord Hotel, which is a really neat hotel, overlooking the river, overlooking the bridge in the National Harbor where the big Ferris wheel is. And since even though I don't travel much anymore, I still have pretty nice status, and I have a nice balcony view where I can see the river. Nice. Although the sun just dipped down, so it's just dark out there now.
Yeah, that's a huge property. I've had a chance to go to that one, and then Nashville and Dallas. There's a little. I mean, the one there on the harbor is less of the giant city within a city, but it's huge.
Right.
It's still big.
It's big, and then there's just lots of shopping and restaurants in the area, and I think there's a casino up on the hill or something like that. So I've been in a conference room since 7:30 this morning, so I can't say I've fully experienced it though.
So we're going to talk quickly about conferences. I mean, I've had a pretty lazy day. Being a new, again, DirecTV customer, I get the free NFL Sunday ticket package. And I'll tell you that Red Zone channel, it eliminates the waste. I'm going to try to make a labored connection to lean here. Like, it is all value added time. There are no commercials. It's going from game to game. But I'll tell you, I'm not good at watching this. It's almost too much. Like 3 games, 4 games going on, and it's a little sensory overload.
Yeah. I'm a soccer guy, obviously, and they have Goal Rush sometimes where it's, watching lots of games and they bounce around and all of that. But I kind of prefer to sit back and just watch a single game, even though my team was playing while I was listening to Admiral Stavridis, who is the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces. Wow. And one of the most brilliant speakers and just guys I've ever seen. Really, you listen to him and you want to go read like 47 books and study everything. But I'm doing this at the National Association of Corporate Directors Annual Conference, which I try to go to every couple of years. But since the pandemic, it's been a little while.
So did the board members and the companies want this crystal ball of help me alleviate this feeling of uncertainty and create certainty where we can't really have it?
Not necessarily. I say not the more experienced ones. I think it's navigating this uncertainty and remaining calm and diligent through the uncertainty. So, actually someone asked, the Admiral, how do you remain calm through these stressful times? And he 2 things he said was exercise.
Yeah.
Take care of your body so that it can help you process. And then he also said read, right? And so he shared a biography of FDR, who had to deal with a whole lot more than we're dealing with today, right? Between the Great Depression and World War. And I don't say he was calm through the whole thing, but boy, he was, right?
Yeah.
So he shared that as an example of that. And so, yeah, I think we're all looking for a little more wisdom, a little more insight or foresight. But I think the ones who are more experienced are just looking on how do we best navigate it? And then importantly, how do we help our management teams navigate it? Because often they're either younger or less experienced, or they have more at stake. And so the pressure to perform in that uncertainty is not always our best friend.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's a pretty big theme of this conference so far.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting into a 3-week stretch of travel. Different reasons, different places. I'll be 2 weeks from now, and not long after this episode gets released, I'll be in Dallas for the AME Annual Conference, Association for Manufacturing Excellence. So I already know some of the people that I'm going to run into there, and some of it I'm sure will be by surprise and bump into people. If you're a listener and you see me there, come say hi, whether I know you already or not. You're talking about board members and executives. I'm excited to hear. One of the keynote speakers is Larry Culp, the chairman and CEO of GE. For those who don't know his background and corporate history, he was CEO, and I'm assuming also chairman at Danaher.
Yep.
Considered, great American lean success story. And so it'd be really interesting to hear him, share, he's been in the role at GE 4 years now.
Yeah, is it 4 years? I was thinking it was 3, but
no, it just hit that anniversary. And he shared on LinkedIn, article kind of reflections and trying to answer this question. Here's some lean talk, unexpected lean talk. I'm curious how much of this he'll share, at the conference, but in his public LinkedIn post, he was talking about this question of culture change. And somebody asked him, how long is it going to take for lean to really just become the way we think and do things here? And he's hoping that's next year. But I mean, I'm sure in any huge corporation, there are pockets of it. And it's not yes, no, or evenly spread across a corporation like this, right?
Yeah, I mean, the best lean thinker in the world has good days and bad days. So I'm not sure I think that might be a question that I challenge the premise rather than try to answer. But he's, and I'll be curious about his speech, how much he talks about the structure, right? Because he's made a major structural change fundamentally to get the leaders in the organization closer to the customer and more distant from a corporate center of gravity, right? So change the center of gravity of the people and of the decisions to be closer to the customer and less to a corporate entity. And so that's a pretty major, we don't talk a lot about the structural impact on lean, but it's a neat, it will be a neat story if it works the way he intends it. But I'll be curious to learn how much he talks about that.
Yeah. And there's stuff that's been shared publicly. I blogged about this recently of operational improvements at one of their sites in Italy, and culture change around problem solving and leadership. But then there's the questions of, and these are more board level conversations, maybe spinning off other GE healthcare and GE power systems and into separate corporations, and the GE that remains will be GE Aviation, renamed GE Aerospace. And that's the part of GE my wife is now working in. So it's so it'll be interesting to hear what's being shared publicly and what his reflections are just about lean from the C-suite. That's not a perspective we always get to hear.
Yeah, and I think it's also very different. I would love to hear him talk about it this way: the difference in coming up in an organization that's been on a lean journey for 30 years versus coming into an organization that was not lean, right? Some people think GE was lean, but coming into an organization that was not lean and kind of hitting the reset button. And that had to be, I just kind of wondering how much I know how to lean, so I'm just going to keep doing that and the organization will shift, or did he have to approach it in a very different way? So,
Good
yeah.
questions. So I'll share notes, and I'm sure take notes.
I'm sure you
there in a blog post. So I'll be in Dallas, and then the next week I'll be in Iowa at the Iowa Lean Consortium event. So I've been there before. You've been there, right?
Yeah. Iowa Lean Consortium is always one of my favorites. It's a really well-run organization and some great people. I mean, I think as far as coalitions go and groups like that, the sort of practitioner to, and not to put us down, right? You and I down, but the practitioner to say consultant author ratio always seems really solid in favor of the practitioner side, very company centric. And I've spoken there before, and I'm not really doing a lot of running around giving speeches anymore, but it was always a favorite place for me to visit. So
it's a good group, and I'll have the opportunity to hang out with different people from Kinexus at both events, because Kinexus is a sponsor of both conferences. So looking forward to that and sharing whiskey with folks. I don't think I'll have time to go I might be able to do a gemba visit in Des Moines on Sunday when I get in. We'll see, but I try to sample something local. Templeton Rye is there. That's probably, if I had a favorite Iowa whiskey, at least you can find Templeton Rye pretty easily these days.
Yeah. Okay. It's a neat opportunity. And, it would be kind of cool for us to, this is definitely next level production that we're not really prepared for, but show up at the same conference, a few bottles of whiskey and some microphones, and we record a whole set of lean whiskey episodes with some of our friends at these conferences. But it doesn't sound like something we'd pull off.
We can try some small experiment someday.
Well, that we can pull off, right? We're pretty happy to experiment and admit it doesn't always work. So
so we'll try. But then speaking of easier to get, we always talk about our friend David Meyer and Glens Creek Distilling. He's an hour and a half away. I haven't gotten down there yet. I've sent some well-intended messages. I'm coming to see you soon. Dave, I should have done that, or I should have done that today.
Well, he's there a lot, obviously, and it's been a while since I've gone to see him. And I did stock up well enough that I still have a little inventory, mostly because I've been savoring it. I don't want to run out as I have before. But I'm really happy to see, I've seen some of their social media, and that really looks busy. And obviously they're posting pictures when they're busy and versus not being busy. But I really hope that, I know the small distilleries that really depended on, people traveling by that really had a hard time with the pandemic. The crowds have come back, and I really hope they stay busy. So you might go visit, and he might not have time for you because he's got a line full of customers, which would be fantastic.
Well, if I were to go down on a weekend, I can buy some bottles and then go down on some weekday when I take the day off. That might be opportunity to have a more leisurely visit. But so we've been talking bourbon here and rye, but the theme today when it comes to whiskey is going to go across the pond and across a channel to Scotland. So there's lean whiskey with a Y at the end, I guess, today.
Today's just the Y.
I'm saying it with the KY spelling at the end. And we've got a theme here. We're either calling it a scotch that most people maybe haven't heard of, or we could call them obscure-ish scotches. Right off the top of your head, what do you think of the scotches that most people think of. Like I would think of, Glenlivet as on most every airplane.
Glenlivet, Glenmorangie, Balvenie, right? There's certain Delta was always the Dewar's white label, but I just call that Delta Scotch. But you go to a restaurant, and I always found that there were sort of three different levels of Scotch menus. There was a really basic, which was some Glenmorangie, some Balvenie, some Johnny Walker. Yeah. And then there was sort of like a second level, which would include Oban. Like Oban was always my, like, if I saw it, I knew they were like a second tier menu. Like they were just a little more past the first recognition.
And I would put Balvenie in that middle category, because I think like in the first category of what you're always going to see would include like Macallan.
Yep.
You're not always going to see a Balvenie at your kind of typical.
No, you won't. That's true. But yeah, Glen, Johnny, certainly Glenmorangie, Glenfiddich. Those were, menus that weren't even trying would have those. Right. And then if they got to Oban, I felt like they were at least trying. And then there's those that really try, and those it could be all over the map, but these are not scotches that you would probably find on most restaurant menus or even on at your liquor store shelf.
Yeah.
Now they're not so obscure that you can't find them either. But like I say, you just walk into your neighborhood liquor store, you may not find them there. So.
Yeah. Well, we'll let you go first. The one I'm going to sample two side by side. One I bought at the store right nearby, and one that I brought back from Scotland. And we're going to talk more about that. We teased it last episode that I was going to Scotland end of August. That did happen. So that's another reason to have Scotch as a theme.
Yes. So another reason we haven't recorded for a little while. So I am working on finishing a bottle of, now I, like with most Scottish words, I know I'm mispronouncing them.
Yeah.
And I think it was last episode. I was pronouncing Bruichladdich.
Bruichladdich is a tough one.
It's a tough one, but I was pronouncing, so I was very proud of that. But this one I know is not right. But I've always called it Kilchoman.
I heard from our guide Kilchoman. So it's more it's I can't quite do the proper accent, but the C is almost silent.
Kilchoman. And based on the way they wrote it on the label, which, for those that are watching on YouTube and will see me holding up the bottle, I don't know if they did it to help you pronounce it right, but it does make sense. So now I'll try to remember that.
In the middle. Yeah.
The H is highlighted and stylized. And so Kilchoman. And I've had two bottles from this distillery. Now they're sort of a rebirth brand, so they haven't been around again that long. Previously, I had one of their younger. I don't know actually the age statement because it doesn't have it, but I think it's Makir Bay or Makir Bay, and it's a very light. It's a very lightly colored and fairly light tasting Scotch. This is the Loch Gorm, and Loch is obviously sort of, well, it's not really a lake. It sort of looks like a lake, acts like a lake, but is connected to the sea. If I remember
it's funny. Lake is both a loch, a self-contained freshwater body of water we would call a lake, but then also seawater, what we would call a bay, I think.
Yeah, but I think it's still freshwater. I think it's connected, but it looks like a bay, but it's still freshwater and fed from freshwater, which would make sense because you wouldn't include seawater in your whiskey. But it's called Loch Gorm. It's a limited edition, but I'm not sure how limited it's limited. It wasn't like it was out. Go to their website. They show four expressions, and this is one of them. So it's not like they just released it one time and it's gone. But much darker, lots of caramel, and thick color and sort of thick taste. 46%. Sherry cask matured, which is where some of the color comes from, but quite good. I mean, it is in that. I'd almost maybe call it the Glens Creek of scotches. With a little more, a little more on the savory side, and less on some of the sweet side. They talk about peat in the tasting notes, which I don't get. It's not a peat, what we call a peat monster. It's not just overloaded peat, but you got some heavier fruits and sort of toffee flavors, and it's quite good. I enjoy it. I'll be disappointed when the bottle's gone, and I'll have to go find another one. But this is now a brand it's my second bottle from this brand, and I don't want to say I'm hooked, but I'll be going back to this brand. I think they do a good job.
And that's a whiskey I haven't had. I don't think I even tried it during our trip when we were on Isla, the island of Isla. We drove past. We could see the sign pointing that Kilchoman is up this way, off the main road. We went to Lagavulin and Laphroaig and Bruichladdich and Bunnahabhain and Bowmore. Can't hit them all. I mean, we got pretty close.
Right. There's a lot of them.
Trying to remember if it's 8 or 9 on the island, but Kilchoman, they call it like a grain to glass distillery, that they actually do some farming of some barley right there.
Yeah, and they have right on the bottle, they call it Isla's Farm Distillery. And there's been a bit of a trend in the micro side of doing more of that. I think, I don't know if we've talked about this particular, but we've talked about Dad's Hat Rye in Pennsylvania before. I've tasted it on the show, but they're working on their own, not only their a rebirthed rye variety that they're the only one growing, and they're working with one farmer. It's their rye that's only going to go to them and their bottles. So I think there's a lot of times rye is just a category, and it's all sorts of stuff mixed together. As an example, as is corn that goes into bourbon. But yeah, when you know how important the grain is, makes sense to control it all the way back to the farming. So don't want to say it makes it better, it doesn't make it better, but talk about managing your supply chain and quality control and shaping your flavors. And I respect it.
Well, there's been a trend on Isla of using more local barley. Like a lot of it's actually brought in from the mainland of Scotland.
Right.
And the fact that it's distilled and produced on Isla is generally where a lot of that character comes from. But I've got a bottle I was able to pick up here locally after being introduced to it in Scotland. Bruichladdich has some releases, they call it, island barley. And it's almost like a vintage with a wine where they'll say, okay, this is a 2013 Isla Barley. So I think it was just barley grown that year. I wouldn't think there's that much variation year to year as you would have with grapes.
No, there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But it's a neat trick, and I think as a region of Scotch, I think they've kind of figured out, hey, we're our own brand, right? Like Scotch isn't Scotch, right? And we're our own brand, and it makes sense to invest in our own brand with tourism and of course, putting your region on the front of the bottle and not just on the back of the bottle. And so makes a lot of sense what they're doing. So so that's what I'm drinking. What are you drinking?
So we had a great visit to Isla. We stayed 3 nights and we did gemba visits, and we'll come back and talk about that again. But we also we took a side trip to a different island, Jura. There's a distillery there
Mhm.
called Jura. And then we also went then for one other day to Campbelltown, which is a region it's probably the most obscure of the regions, I would think, to most Scotch drinkers in the US.
Lots of production, but not as well known. Yeah, I agree.
So it used to be, so Campbelltown's a bigger town than any, it's almost a small city compared to the small communities on Isla. But Campbelltown used to be the king of whiskey production, if you will. They used to have 30 distilleries, and now they're down to just 3.
Wow.
And we visited 2 of them. One that we really knew and had been a favorite of mine and my wife's, Springbank. But then what I'm drinking tonight, to answer your question, is one of the other distilleries, Glen Scotia. And there's pride in region where it says classic Campbelltown malt. They're putting that right front and center on the label. So I'm trying 2. This is the Glen Scotia 18 that people might be able to find at a better whiskey shop, under $100. So for an 18-year Scotch, that's there are some that certainly cost more than that. Finished in Oloroso sherry barrels. Part of the education we got with our guide in Scotland was a better appreciation, quick detour, that there are so many different types of sherry.
Yes.
Different levels of sweetness and from different regions of Spain. So to call out in particular an Oloroso sherry as opposed to a Pedro Jimenez sherry and other types, but this one is at 46% ABV. You can say it doesn't have a ton of color. By looking at it, you wouldn't think it was sherry finished. And, you never know. Does that mean finished 2 years or 6 months?
Right.
I don't think that's always disclosed. But, you get the taste of the sherry. But then what I'm having side by side is a distillery release we brought back. This is actually, it's 20 years, finished in first fill ruby port. And you can see how much more red that one is. So we're going from kind of like a straw. No, it's darker than straw, but then definitely to more of a very copper color with the port finish. So yeah, really, I had a great visit to Glen Scotia, and so again, Springbank, and then Glen Guile is the third one, which I don't think I've ever tried. I don't know that name at all. That's even to me more obscure. But back to your categories of this whiskey bar, basic tier, second tier, third tier. You start seeing Springbank.
Yes.
More and more. But then I think Springbank has become really trendy, where it's getting really difficult to find because they're not a producer.
Yeah, they're not that big, and they put a bunch into marketing, and it had one of those sort of, well, you can't find this or afford that. So Springbank is what that's a find, and so now it's become, I do think it is a little hard. I don't think Scotch has been as fallen as victim to what I call the Instagram plight of bourbon collecting, where people are posting their pictures of Eagle Rare and even Buffalo Trace. Like a Buffalo Trace isn't nothing special, yet people will buy a bunch and post pictures because they also make Pappy and they think they're drinking Pappy, and so I don't know what they're thinking, but. And Buffalo Trace is perfectly fine. I enjoy Buffalo Trace, but I wouldn't stand in line for it.
But there's this glut, or not glut, sorry, a boom, where the prices have skyrocketed, and Scotch almost becomes then a value play. Of like, well,
I agree
a little bit. It's different, of course, but more better value for money, as they say in England, right? Yeah, it really is. So the word glut came to mind because I'm looking forward to, this isn't good for the producers, but at some point the boom and bust cycle will end up in the other direction, and we might have a little bit more of a glut instead of not having enough. But looking at Glen Scotia compared to Glenlivet. Glenlivet produces about 8 times as much each year as does Glen Scotia, just from a quick Google search. But then the great thing about visiting Glen Scotia, I mean, it's transition into Gemba talk. Like he didn't lead the tour, but we got to meet like the master distiller and had a fairly long conversation with him in the shop. And you realize, okay, you guys are really interested in this. You're not a group that's just going around trying to get drunk. And then he starts bringing out like, hey, I'd love for you to try this. And like that's kind of a special opportunity to hear someone talk about their philosophy of how they do things and why they do things a certain way.
Yeah. Well, let's transition to In the Gemba. So this is sort of, we don't talk, we usually talk a little bit about whiskey, and it's mostly just drinking whiskey while we're talking about lean. This is probably closer to a blended topic of, in the Gemba. And you went and toured and got to see some of the deep stuff of what really happens. But, just to put it in context around it, not just being an interesting topic about Scotch, is, I think anytime you go to the Gemba, whether you need the knowledge or not, you gain insight, you gain wisdom, you gain appreciation. There's so many things in this world that, are seemingly simple. Yet when you get closer to the Gemba, you see how hard some aspects of it are. I remember Land O'Lakes was an old client of mine, and you go there and it's like you just take cream, you pasteurize it, churn it, extrude it into butter. Like, how hard is that? But then you realize how many different ways it gets complex and hard and subtle and nuanced that but you can't appreciate that without going to the Gemba. So, whether people need that knowledge around Scotch or not, it's interesting, at least to us. But I think there's also just a broader lesson around there's things you can learn up close you can't learn, in a book.
You can learn about the product and the people and the place that's informative, but it also forms a connection. And this is why they allow tourists to come in to their Gemba, right? I mean, you remember that you've been to this place and it remains special to you. And, people say, I think only half jokingly, that, it always tastes better. You could say this about wine. It always tastes better when you're there somehow, because it's an experience.
Yeah, because you have that connection. There's a podcast I occasionally listen to called Blue Collar Bourbon, and they'll sometimes talk about, at least, they try to decide whether they do blind tastings of mostly bourbon and rye, an occasional flyer on a Scotch or something, but they'll sometimes talk about whether they would buy it, try it, or trash it. That's their sort of scale.
Sure.
But sometimes they would say, I'd buy it if I was visiting the distillery. They're very conscious that, if you're visiting the distillery, it's a different, you wouldn't buy it off the shelf. You wouldn't keep buying it. But if you're at the distillery, you have this little extra connection and part of the story. And, you get to, especially for things like distillery editions that you can't get at a store. So,
and that's, for precious suitcase space. To bring stuff that you're going to savor, because you carried it all the way home, and it's special and it's very limited. But what you said a minute ago reminds me, Jamie, of the old quote from President Eisenhower. I pulled it up here. It said, farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from the cornfield.
I put that quote on so many slides. It's one of my favorites. And he's got it dead right. So.
But instead of corn, I mean, there's barley fields. Now, I didn't see that. I was going to give a quick rundown of the value stream. Like I saw the entire value stream, not the farming,
right?
But the one early stage of the value stream that then kind of flows in and branches into the barley is peat. and to have an appreciation. I know from a previous visit to Speyside, where they occasionally, like Balvenie will occasionally produce a peated whiskey. Benriach, which is a favorite of mine, they do more peated whiskey, but there is this association with Isla, especially like the really heavily peated, the Octomore whiskeys are the world's most heavily peated bourbon. And they measure this in like, parts per million. And there's somewhere it's almost like a bragging rights thing, kind of like with hot sauce.
Right.
Like how peaty could it possibly be? And so whether you like that or not is, of course, is a matter of preference, and peat in and of itself, it's not the only variable that matters. But I had the sense that peat is from the ground, and it's like chunks of dried, semi-decomposed soil. But when we were there in Isla, our guide took us out to these boggy, marshy, a bog and a marsh are probably two different things. We'll call it boggy. It's very damp.
Yes.
Fields where basically there's this vertical face that's been cut into the side of sort of a little bit of a hill. And then basically, like, people go out there and do this very manually, very physical work of cutting layers and, fairly standard sized chunks. They're almost the size of one of these artificial fireplace Duraflame logs.
Yeah.
And that's the peat. And then you can see, because the vegetation is different there in Isla than it would be if they're getting peat in Speyside, there's like the stringier organic material that is not, that provides a lot more smoke than the peat that they might be using in Speyside. So then you start getting this connection of like, well, not all peat is the same. And some of it isn't just providing heat with a little bit of smoke. Some of it's providing heat with a lot of smoke. And that's where generally you get the style in Isla, where not all of them are heavily peated, but I think that's what people associate your Laphroaig, your Lagavulin, those are very peaty. I almost said Talisker, which is a very, very peated Scotch, but not from Isla. So you can get, I probably incorrectly at some point thought that was an Isla whiskey, and it's not.
I probably did too.
It's easier
I
to
definitely,
say.
Yeah. I kind of looked at it as a, 1 degree off of Laphroaig or something early on, but I think also I've also heard or read about that, the constant barrage of the sea salt, mist coming over helps keep it boggy, right? That's kind of where some of the moisture comes in, is the winds whip up the seas and comes in. And so that affects it. And then, even if you're not cutting it, some of the water that they use will run through the bogs and pick up levels of peat in the water itself. And it's apparently unclear how much that affects the final product.
I mean, if it's running, like out there, it's basically dirt, but then it's the burning of it that produces. So I wonder, water running through there might have a little bit of salinity to it if it's not perfectly fresh water. Yeah,
it's a different, and it's not really the main effect, but the main effect is the burning of it, and it really isn't. It's not going in the whiskey, right? That's the important thing. Is it's not an ingredient.
Yeah, it's crazy when I
part of the process
that smoking. So we get back to the value stream around the barley, where the peat comes up to it, and I'll run through the value stream quickly. So you obviously the barley is grown and delivered, and then it is quote unquote malted. Now you have a sourcing decision. So there's a large industrial facility on the island of Isla that most everybody buys their malted barley from. There are some places like Springbank in Campbelltown. I'm trying to remember who on Isla has a malting floor, but some of them at least do some of their own malting. I think partly to show tour visitors, and partly just to say they're doing it and it's tradition. But the malting is that germination process of the barley, and then to stop that growth, that's where the heat and the fire, with or without smoke, comes in to stop the germination process. So then the barley moves along. You've got grinding mills. Now, a couple of these distilleries had these 100-year-old mills, really old-timey looking equipment, not the least bit computer controlled. It's all manually adjusted, unlike the new equipment. In two different places, one in Isla, one in Campbelltown. You almost think, like, is this just a story you tell the tourists, that supposedly there's only one guy still around who knows how to maintain these machines, and his name is on like a steel plate,
and he's 94.
I mean, it could be, it could be true. It makes for a great story, but they at some point might have to replace it with something more modern and less romantic. And then you go through, with the grinding, you've got the mashing and the cooking and the fermentation, the distiller's beer. Then you've got the distillation and the barreling. But before coming to the end of the supply chain, there was one quick fun story. At one of the distillery gembas, we got to talk to the guy who was running the stills, and my wife said something like, this seems like you must think you have the best job in the world. And he said, no, it can actually be quite boring. He had to make some adjustments, and then you go sit for a couple of hours. He does a lot of reading apparently while he's working there. So he seemed happy, but I think he'd been doing it a long time, and it kind of gets to the point of like, it's not as glamorous as you think it might be.
It's like managing, just because I can see one from my hotel room, managing a drawbridge. Right? It's short moments of very important work where you have to pay attention to what you're doing, followed by sitting down and waiting.
Yeah. So we saw a lot of stills and a lot of distilling. And then the maturation, the aging, the warehouses. I would suggest don't confuse that with the waste of inventory, because that time in the barrel is absolutely a value-added process.
Yeah, and you can taste the difference, right? I mean, you take the same thing that's aged for two different, since you were a Jura as an example. Yeah, I guess they have a 12-year and a 10-year, I think.
And older, yeah.
And older, right? But I don't think I've had the older. I think I have the 10 on my shelf right now. And yeah, you put them side by side, you can taste the difference. No, I mean, and again, the duration of that aging, right? I mean, your bottle there would be in college, right? Like,
right.
My the two bottles are the ages of my two older kids, and that's a long time to just sit on something and watch it get better. But that's the important thing, is you're not just putting it away under lock and key and then hope it gets better. You monitor it, you manage it. There's still activity.
Yeah.
But a lot of the activity is just making sure the process is working. And
a year is not a year where, well, and with Scotch, you never know, because they are allowed to add caramel coloring to it. Straight bourbon whiskey, you are not allowed to add coloring. So the authenticity of the color might not be completely known. But like an 18-year-old bourbon would generally be a lot darker in color than this 8-year-old Scotch, even with the sherry finish, which does tend to impart a little more color than just using old bourbon barrels would.
Yeah, and bourbon is using virgin barrels, and it's a much more aggressive process of impact, barrel impact, where Scotch is a much more subtle interaction, and so it takes a little longer usually to have the impact you want. And it also, I think, ultimately, which is why I on average prefer Scotch, adds to some of the depth and complexity and dynamic nature of Scotch.
Yeah. Oh, I was putting a little water into my other one. This is my Springbank
Springbank.
pitcher.
There you go.
A
Nice.
little glass dropper, which we managed to get home without any breakage. But I was going to tell another fun story. Now on the consumption part of the value stream and the value add to the customer trying it, Lagavulin was a trip I was really looking forward to. Did you ever watch Parks and Recreation? And there's a character Ron.
I know the show. I don't want to say I sat down and watched it, but yeah.
But you can go find. I'll send you the clip, and we can link to it in the show notes. There was an episode. Ron Swanson, famously a Scotch drinker, famously a Lagavulin drinker. The actor Nick Offerman loves their whiskey. And there's an episode from the series where he actually goes to Scotland. He goes to Isla. He visits Lagavulin. And you can see, like, going back and watching that clip, he was in this tasting room, this part of the warehouse, really. And like, that's exactly where I am or was. And there's one guy who's worked there, Ian MacArthur. He's worked there for 50 plus years in different distilleries. Mm-hmm. Was in that episode. You see him just interacting with the Ron Swanson character. I don't think you hear him say anything, but I'm like, that guy, like that was not an actor. That's actually the guy. And they said that Nick Offerman had been there, I think, like just 2 weeks before us. Like that would have been mind blowing to actually see the actor comedian Nick Offerman there. But they have a release of Lagavulin. It's the Nick Offerman edition.
Okay.
Put his name to, and it's quite popular, and he's done promotional stuff with.
Yeah, he's done a lot of promotional stuff with them, and it does seem to be one of those celebrity endorsements that is like, this is the product I like,
yeah,
and there's an endorsement deal in there, and we'll make that work, which is better than some of these celebrity bourbons mostly, but these celebrity whiskeys that they just we'll find some barrels and put our name on it and call it something.
Yeah,
something cool, but
passion for him, not just a cash marketing,
right? Yeah, and it's
kind of thing.
And I have to say, Lagavulin 16 is pretty much always on my shelf. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say it's my favorite, but every time I finish a bottle, I find myself, let me get another bottle, put it back on the shelf, and always seem to want a bottle because it is distinct, and I like it. It's good stuff.
And I'll throw in the show notes or the blog post on my blog a photo of me and Ian, and like he's this. I know to say leprechaun that's Irish, and I mean it as a compliment. Like he's this kind of charming Scottish leprechaun of a man. He's not real big, and he's got kind of a squeaky voice. And so I asked him, "Hey, can we take a picture?" He was doing the tasting for everybody who was there, so I was the first one to ask, "Can we get a picture?" And so we pose. And he was being cheeky, and as you get ready for that cheese moment, he turns, he says, "Say Laphroaig," just playing a prank on me. And like a lemming, I say Laphroaig. Damn it. We're at Lagavulin. I know this. And so he got me. But funny guy. But then here's the thing, I think of like COVID times or getting past COVID. They actually allowed us to basically siphon whiskey out of the barrel by mouth with the whiskey thief. And, before I put my mouth on the guy, I had the opportunity to do that with one barrel to pull out the tasting samples. Before I had the opportunity, they took a rag with a little bit of whiskey and they wiped it off.
I mean, we had plenty of jokes early on in COVID that drinking whiskey will kill COVID when we know the alcohol level isn't anywhere near enough to do that.
Not quite. The barrel strengths are in like the 55% range. So no, it's not hand sanitizer, but I'm vaccinated, I'm boosted, I survived it. It was a risk I chose to take.
Plenty of other exposures. So
but that's a couple of the highlights anyway, but I saw most of the value stream. I did not do a value stream map as part of my homework, but we could do that.
Yeah. No, I think that's neat though, because you get appreciation of some of those subtleties, right? Around, even distilling, right? You kind of go, well, distilling isn't distilling's a step, but that's not where a lot of the art is, right?
Mhm.
It's in a lot of things, as our friend David Meyer will talk about. There's a lot of different things that, it's not just one thing. Like, a lot of people think it's just the age in the barrels, like,
Right.
oh, but no, there's so many different things that affect the taste that
Yeah.
you really have to understand the whole process. I mean, this is one where you do have to understand the whole value stream if you're going to actually run it well.
There's lots of variables. There's lots of critical to quality dynamics and things that you would want to understand and control for. So that was my trip. But Jamie, you've had a chance in your travels here to visit a couple distilleries.
Yeah. So most people that know me know I'm trying to travel a lot less than I used to. 48 weeks of the year. I'm in a Marriott. I'm still titanium for life, and I'm like, I'm like, I don't feel like I need to be. And but I did have a recent road trip, and it involved a couple weekends where I just had to drive like from one location to another for 6-7 hours. So I had some time to kill at a couple stops, and did visit a couple distilleries. Now, I didn't do tours.
Mm-hmm.
One is you generally had to sign up, and half the time there was separate from the tasting room. I didn't expect to find anything particularly exciting there at those. But I visited two distilleries in Michigan. One in Western Michigan, mm-hmm. called Journeyman in Three Oaks, Michigan, which is a tiny little town. It has 2 stoplights, I think, maybe a little more than that, but not much. And tasted that. Good stuff. I think they had a 4-grainer, a couple good ryes, but there's plenty of micro distilleries that we do a whiskey, a gin, a vodka, and they line them all up, and almost all of the micro stills will have a vodka and a gin and a rum, usually.
Cash flow when they're getting started.
Yeah. I'm not going to blame them for that, but you can kind of tell when somebody's whiskey forward, mm-hmm. right? And so it's like, oh, well, we have like 5 different varieties of whiskey and a gin and a vodka and a rum. And so, these guys met that requirement. So I visited them. It was pretty good. Picked up a couple bottles, as you tend to do. Always more than you would probably pay for that same bottle on a store shelf. But I doubt I'm going back to Journeyman anytime soon. And then the other was Two James in Detroit. And this is in an old building right in the shadows of the old Detroit train station, which is a famous building. The Pope years ago did a big event there. It's been closed for decades. In Corktown, where the old Tiger Stadium was, and it's again a place where probably most of the people I saw coming in had a mixed cocktail, right? Because they do their own specialized cocktails with their ingredients, and so I just want a cocktail. They're just treating it like a high-end bar. I did a tasting, mm-hmm. and again, it was a whiskey-forward distillery with including an unaged whiskey, a White Lightning, what generally called, or White Dog.
Spirit, they call it sometimes.
Yeah, that's goes on the bottle better, but they actually bring in some peated malt to blend with a bourbon, which is an interesting combination. But I have to say they were quite good. I enjoyed Two James in Detroit, right on Route 12 in Corktown. So those were a couple of my stops, right? And it's not bad. You can you go to a bar, you're going to pay $15 for a cocktail. You pay $20, you get a tasting, and taste a bunch of stuff, buy a couple bottles, and I think it's a I don't want to say it's a good way to kill time, but I think it's a much more interesting to me than just going to a bar and ordering a drink.
Yeah. Well, I've had Two James. I was in Detroit for work in about 2015, we'll call it. Had a chance to try it at a bar, again, like trying to drink local. I grew up around Detroit, so it's cool to see what's going on. I did buy a couple bottles to come back, and actually at the store here recently, I saw The two bottles that I had, one's called Johnny's Smoking Gun, which is a unique, almost meant to be kind of like a Japanese grain whiskey. And then the other one, where'd it go? Grass Widow.
Okay. Yeah, that's their bourbon, I think, right?
It's a high rye bourbon.
Oh, yeah.
So I like it when people are trying to do stuff that stands out stylistically. They're not just trying to make a copy of somebody else's bourbon. They're doing
and not gimmicky either, right? I mean, infusions and stuff like that. I mean, the Smoking Gun was very smoky. I think some of my favorites weren't those two. They were some other ones, but I think they do a good job. And the bar right there in Detroit is quite a nice little spot.
I'll have to check that out next time. I'm closer to Detroit now. So I'll get up there. And then I was going to say that when you're talking about time to kill, early August, after we did the last episode, I was in Michigan, Traverse City, for the Michigan Lean Consortium. So I had a chance to visit Traverse City Whiskey Company. I tell you, I tried some at evening event. Wasn't real impressed, but I thought, well, let's go and visit and let's see. Well, then they had some cask strength bottles. And I'm not saying higher proof is always better.
No, but it helps.
There's a flavor component that sometimes gets lost if it's diluted down, proofed down too low. So I actually bought 3 sample bottles and I tasted it and I wanted to hate it. And I thought, okay, a cherry whiskey, like it's Michigan. So, okay, you have to, I don't drink flavored whiskeys, but it was really subtle. It wasn't the type of thing where they've added sugar or sweetness. Like it's the type of thing that would actually play really well in classic cocktails like a old fashioned or a Manhattan. So I will give a shout out to Traverse City Whiskey up in that part of northwestern. Would you call it northwestern Lower Peninsula?
You would, for those that know enough, northwestern Lower Peninsula. It's not northwestern Michigan, just northwestern Lower Peninsula. I think 80% of the tart cherries in the world come from the Traverse City area. That's that area of Michigan. So definitely
makes sense.
Part of their heritage for sure. So,
well, I'm glad you've got to visit and drink local and see what's going on where you've traveled.
Yeah, I haven't done that in DC, but where I am now. But it is a nice opportunity. And these guys are all out there trying to do a good job. So visit your local distiller.
Yeah. Well, I'll report back in the next episode. My other week of travel, I'm going to be in Portland, Oregon. And that is the home. I've been before, but it's been probably 8 or 9 years. One of the top 5 whiskey bars in the United States. It's called the Multnomah Whiskey Library. Okay. They've got thousands of whiskeys. I think it's technically a private club. So I had to buy a 1-day membership in advance for me and a colleague to go, which sounds, jump through that hoop, but it'll be good to go back there. And I'll tell you what I find there that's interesting.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's imagine a new opportunity for flights in that process. So, well, do we still have time for our little sort of content topic? Because we were focused on our value stream today.
We did. Well, do you want to touch on it briefly? Jamie, he wrote a post on LinkedIn and he's got, some thoughts to share. This is, I don't have similar experience in this process of work retreat as he wrote about, but we'll link to it in the show notes. Do you want to kind of just?
Yeah, well, I mean, you do, right? Because even the reason it came up was we were trying to schedule, and you were taking a writing day, and
it was a short retreat, sure.
Short retreat, right? But I mean, it was deep work, right? It wasn't sitting around doing emails. It was deep work that requires some focus and longevity and things like that. And so I think retreat might be a a strong word because it implies location changes, which is nice when you can do that. But yeah, I wrote a post. I actually had a friend, a professor, a friend who was taking his own work retreat to do some planning and development and design and stuff like that, and asked for some advice. And I gave him a bunch of advice on email actually, and he's like, you should write that up. So I did. But the main message is that whether you're writing a book, you're doing strategic planning, you're doing reflection, you're trying to work on a deep design for something, right? Our brain and our body and our work has different cycles, and it's really hard to let me do emails for 15 minutes, write a book for 15 minutes, do emails, then have a meeting for 20 minutes.
Book work can't be juggled the same as the other tasks you might try to switch between. I would agree.
Right. And so there's certain types of work that for many people just get pushed by the wayside because they don't fit in that cycle. And so you have to design in some type of retreat. And so I'll call it a retreat from the normal chaos of work. Mm-hmm. Retreat, again, doesn't have to be a different location, but it requires changing your mental and physical rhythms so your brain can work differently. Again, whether you're writing a book, which you and I both can resonate for, and a lot of it comes from my book writing. I went way up to the mountains, and I did a lot of things differently than I would on a normal work day when I was off writing. And I, some of it was just force yourself out of your routine, right? Mm-hmm. So you're, certain parts of your brain are on edge, right? Some of you is woken up out of your slumber, like you have no routine. So you have to be conscious of kind of everything. So, if you exercise in the morning, exercise in the afternoon. If you drink coffee in the morning, drink tea instead. If just change your wake up time, change your eating schedule, change your physical environment, whatever you have to do. But you put yourself on a very different plane physically so that your brain can also operate on a different plane at the same time. Body and mind are connected. And so that's a lot of what I was writing about in that post. And, I think what's interesting is that, we're in the fourth quarter. Right? I also wrote a very short, that wasn't an article. It's just a post just around the fourth quarter. But a lot of people use the fourth quarter to sprint to the end. Then they might take the holidays to do some reflection and then start, which I think is a mistake. I think you should use the fourth quarter to set up next year, which means people should be doing strategic planning and setting goals now, not January 1st or December 27th or something like that, which means you might need to do some retreats right now, and not just sprint to the end of the year.
One question I was going to ask you, Jamie, as I get deeper into writing, my book on learning from mistakes, kind of based on my favorite mistake podcast, gratuitous plug for that project again.
We're all waiting with anticipation for the book to come out.
There's a week in November where I had very little scheduled, and I said, okay, well, the couple things that I do have scheduled, I'm canceling those meetings. I'm not going to do any work. I'm going to treat it as, I'm full-time employed by myself, but I do contract work with others, right? So I'm calling it quote unquote PTO. I guess it means personal time off, not paid time off, but I can do that. And my hypothesis is that, I'll make so much more progress with that. I was going to ask to borrow your place though, right? Because if I'm home, do I have the distractions of home, and I should turn off the internet and minimize some of the distraction? But should I, how much of the value comes from just focus versus go someplace different?
I think a lot of it is how much that location helps establish your routine. So I wouldn't like I could probably do it from my home, but I wouldn't do it at my desk. I'd work in a different place. I'd clear off a table. I'd clear off a dining room table. I'd work in a place where I'm not used to responding to emails, right? Because you sit down and you respond to emails. Mm-hmm. Now, when I wrote my first book, I did it at Starbucks because Starbucks didn't have internet, right? Which is kind of a weird concept now, right? Yeah. I went to Starbucks because it didn't have internet and I could just write. Now, I do a lot of writing now on Google Docs, and so then I still need internet, which...
Oh, well, pro tip, there's an offline mode.
There is. Yeah, there is an offline mode, and I'm sloppy about getting set up. So I'll start doing that next book, whatever that is. But I think you can work from your home, but you still need to change your physical setup. And so, I mean, that could be as simple as, flip your desk around for the week, stare at a different view, stare at a different wall, put up a big poster that changes, what you're looking at each day. Just something that does enough to sort of shake you out of, oh, this is my work spot. Yeah. But I do think the retreat idea is, again, a retreat from your routines, a retreat from your cadence of boom, 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 email meeting, and to spend enough time immersed in topics to let your intuition and your creativity, really start to flow. So yeah, with a writing week, I would consider a different location, but I'd certainly consider, a different routine. Maybe you every day go out and, have a big breakfast, or, you're already good at taking walks and things like that, but, something different to start your day, and then work in a different setup, even if it is in the same location.
I'll try that, and I'll report back next episode. How's that?
Sounds good. And I'll share my experiments, because I've I don't just write. Like, as other work, I do client design and thinking and trying to think through their problems. Next year, I'm in the process of setting up 1 week a month that will be meeting free. And I'm just going to condense my meeting schedule to other days. And I'll have 1 week a month that now 2 of those weeks, well, 1 week is a vacation week. So I'm not taking 2 weeks that month. 1 week is Thanksgiving week, and 1 week is the week after Christmas, which I would have taken off anyway. So, it's not all for work retreats, but the idea is 1 week a month. And then I can use that time for writing, for reading, for research, for thinking, for design, whatever that might be, and not just try to squeeze it in with all the meetings. And again, similar to you, I don't have, I'll say, anybody to report to. But I would argue that if you're a design engineer, if you're an executive, if you're still paid for clarity of thinking, you're not paid for go to meetings. You're paid to make good decisions. You're paid to design and execute good strategies. And if the cadence of running from meeting to meeting doesn't allow for that to happen, you're not doing the best version of you. I mean, you're not going to probably take a week off a month if you work in a big corporation. But if you don't, even in those roles, if you're not planning time to do that deep think work, you're probably not doing the best job you can do. And I believe that very strongly.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like good tips, good advice, grounded in your experience there. So
yeah, we'll link to the post in the show notes. So
okay. All right. Well, episode 35 coming to a close. And let me find our closing fun question here. Probably short answers on these. If you worked at a distillery, what job would you want to do, Jamie?
Yeah, so master distiller is the easy choice, but there's a bunch of jobs there that are really attentive, and a bunch of jobs there that are physically demanding. But I think running the malting floor it feels like a nice, it sounds hard, right? I mean, spreading out the barley, and
Do you like shoveling snow? It's kind of like shoveling snow.
it's kind of like shoveling snow. And as long as I didn't, as long as I wasn't that cold and I didn't have wind and ice beating in my face, I think I wouldn't, my lower back and knees might disagree, but I think sort of the evenness almost feels like a Zen garden. Like, I'm sure the people that do that job would go, it's not a Zen garden, man. But
you're romanticizing it, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think I'd have fun. Like, how do I optimize this, and what are the little nuances of doing it well, and get the right thickness layer laid down, and a lot of those little take a straightforward task and really study it and get the nuance. That might be. I didn't want to pick an obvious answer, so that's my non-obvious answer.
Well, I mean,
how about you?
Any of those are jobs where through repetition and study and diligence, and you could get really good at it. I want to do quality control. I'll taste the output of your hard work and tell you if it's on track or not. But I mean, I say that half jokingly, but there are jobs where I don't pretend to have the finely tuned nose or palate.
Yeah, I would struggle there.
Of tasters who are the keepers of the quality. And I'm pretty certain this was at Jim Beam. They have a perfectly dark, sound isolated room. It's like a sensory deprivation room other than the tasting. That's where the people who are there, keepers, and it's not just one person. They're keepers of the flavor, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's
their story.
Neat. Yeah. I've had many food clients over the years, and it's nothing like tasting M&Ms in the morning and things like that. But whiskey would be next level. But I also do not have the palate sensory accuracy to do that job well. So,
but before we wrap up, we often talk about glasses. I forgot to mention these little glasses I've been using. I know the people are just listening, can't see it, but they're from Boone Hobben. A lot of the distilleries there were using, they call them a tulip glass, or it's basically like a little mini wine glass.
Right.
So it's a similar shape, not exactly the same as the Glencairn glass that's usually my standard, but it's got a stem, so you're not holding it and warming it unless you want to. Some of those warehouse tastings, it was pretty cool, and they were almost saying, "Here, hold the glass in your hands and warm it up a little bit." But that's what I've been using for my samples, and they're a small glass, so it makes a small tasting pour not seem so small.
Nice. And since I'm traveling, I'm using a cheap wine glass that I have available. So
better than a plastic cup. Thank goodness for the Gaylord.
That was that's what I usually have to suffer through if I'm not thinking about it. So
yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening. And, if you want to find other episodes and learn how you can subscribe, you can go to leanwhisky.com. You can spell that Key, or especially as we were on the Scotch theme today, spell it whiskey with a KY at the end. Those forward to leanblog.org/leanwhiskey. Or if you want to stay the hell away from my website, you can go to Jay.
Yeah, because once you get there, who knows what's going to happen? You might find a lot of other things to do. You can also go to jflynch.com/leanwhiskey.
You can find other fun things to read, and you can get sucked into Jamie's website just as well.
You can.
Look for us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and pretty much anywhere you might want to listen to a podcast.
Absolutely. And then follow us, rate us, review us. It helps us, it helps others. So really appreciate, any of that. We're really appreciate everyone just tuning in to listen. So
or
thanks.
Those who are watching, sorry to interrupt. We have our we both have orange shirts, and because it's October, my wife put out some Halloween decorations, so you can see that.
Yeah, and I apparently planned the art room in my hotel room that's also orange. We did not do any of this on purpose, but it did work out.
The little funny tombstone there, I don't think there's a lean connection. It says the name is Clairvoyance She should have seen it coming.
There you go. So until next time, cheers.
Cheers.